I still remember the day we first met as if it were etched into my memory, a snapshot of that moment frozen in time. It was 12 years ago, but the feelings are as vivid now as they were back then. I was at a bookstore, lost among the rows of books when I noticed her. Lindsay stood in the fiction section, her focus entirely on a shelf of novels. She was completely absorbed, her fingers gently grazing the spines as if seeking out a long-lost friend. She wore a casual yet elegant outfit, a soft, cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, with a colorful scarf wrapped around her neck. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and the light from the ceiling fixtures highlighted the subtle beauty of her profile. There was something about the way she moved, so intent and yet so graceful, that caught my attention. I found myself drawn to her, feeling an inexplicable pull. I tried to focus on the book in my hand, but my gaze kept drifting back to her. After a few moments of indecision, I made my way to the same shelf. I pretended to be engrossed in a book, hoping to find an excuse to strike up a conversation. It was as though fate had decided our paths should cross. She reached for the same book I had been eyeing, and our hands brushed lightly. I looked up, and our eyes met. There was a brief, electric pause before she flashed a warm, genuine smile. I couldn't help but return it, feeling an unexpected surge of warmth. "I guess we have similar taste in books," I said, trying to sound casual. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to make the entire bookstore feel cozier. "Seems like it. I'm Lindsay, by the way." "Adam," I replied, extending my hand. She shook it, her touch light and friendly. We quickly fell into an easy conversation, discussing our favorite authors and books we had recently read. It was clear we had a lot in common, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Lindsay's enthusiasm for literature was infectious. She spoke with such passion and insight that I found myself hanging on every word. As we talked, I learned that she was a writer with a penchant for crafting compelling stories that explored the human condition. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about her work, and I was captivated by her intelligence and creativity. I shared my aspirations and interests, and we discovered that our dreams and values aligned more closely than I could have imagined. We spent hours in that bookstore, losing track of time as we delved into discussions about our favorite books, authors, and personal experiences. The store's closing announcement was a gentle reminder that our time together had flown by. Before we parted ways, Lindsay suggested we continue our conversation over coffee. I agreed eagerly, and we exchanged numbers. Our meeting had been serendipitous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something special. From that day forward, our connection only grew stronger. We spent countless afternoons at quaint coffee shops, debating the merits of different literary genres and sharing our life stories. Each moment we spent together was filled with laughter and deep conversation, and I quickly found myself falling for her. We ventured into new experiences together, exploring museums, attending book readings, and discovering new cafes. Our weekends became a mix of intellectual stimulation and playful adventure. I remember one afternoon when we decided to visit an old, charming library on the outskirts of town. The library was like something out of a fairy tale, with its towering bookshelves and cozy reading nooks. We spent hours there, each of us lost in a different world but connected by the shared joy of discovery. As the months turned into years, our relationship deepened. We moved in together, decorating our apartment with a mix of old books, cozy furniture, and mementos from our travels. Lindsay's love for literature was reflected in every corner of our home. The walls were adorned with framed book covers and literary quotes, creating a space that was uniquely ours. We talked about the future often, about the house we would buy, the family we hoped to start, and the adventures we wanted to have. I remember her dreams of writing a novel while raising children who would grow up surrounded by stories and creativity. It was a vision that filled me with hope and excitement, and I felt certain that our future would be bright and fulfilling. Looking back now, those early memories shimmer with happiness. The bookstore where we met, the coffee dates, and the shared dreams seem like a distant but cherished past. It's difficult to reconcile the Lindsay I knew then with the person she became. But as I reflect on those moments, I hold onto them tightly, hoping they can provide some guidance as I navigate the tumultuous path ahead. The first signs of something being off came slowly, almost imperceptibly. After 12 years of marriage, I thought I knew Lindsay inside out. We had shared so much, from the mundane aspects of everyday life to our most intimate dreams and fears. But in those last few months, something began to shift. At first, I dismissed it as the ebb and flow of life. The weariness that sometimes crept into even the most vibrant relationships. However, as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at me. Lindsay became increasingly withdrawn, often retreating into herself. The vibrant laughter that used to fill our home was replaced with a muted silence. I would catch her staring out of the window, lost in thought, her mind seemingly miles away. When I asked her what was bothering her, she would simply smile and brush it off, saying she was just tired or had a lot on her mind. But I could see it in her eyes. There was a flicker of something unspoken, a barrier that had started to form between us. She began to spend more time alone, often claiming she needed me time. I understood the importance of personal space, but it felt different now. The long walks we used to take together turned into solitary jaunts. I would find her curled up on the couch, but instead of reading or watching our favorite shows, she would be scrolling through her phone. Her expression distant and distracted. When I tried to engage her in conversation, she would nod absently, her attention elsewhere. The disconnect stung, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. The late-night phone calls became more frequent, her laughter echoing through the house, but I wasn't the one making her laugh anymore. Instead, she would pull away from me, her fingers dancing across the screen as she texted someone. I told myself that maybe she was just catching up with old friends or finding inspiration for her writing. But deep down, a dark seed of doubt took root in my mind. I had learned to read Lindsay over the years. I knew the subtleties of her mood, the way her smile reached her eyes, or how her laughter echoed with genuine joy. Now, those signs felt muted and distorted, and I couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. As the weeks dragged on, I started to keep a mental list of the changes I observed. Lindsay would leave the room to take calls, often returning with a look of guilt that made my heart sink. The nights we spent together felt different, as if we were sharing the same space yet living in separate worlds. The intimacy we once had, the deep conversations, the playful teasing, was being replaced with a creeping coldness that made me question everything. One evening, while she was out for one of her solitary walks, I picked up her phone to check the time. I don't know why I felt compelled to do so, but as I glanced at the screen, I noticed a message notification from an unknown number. Curiosity gnawed at me, and without thinking, I opened it. My heart raced as I read the words on the screen. Words of affection and longing, exchanged between Lindsay and our family doctor, Dr. Williams. My breath caught in my throat as I read her confession of feelings, her hopes for their future, and her longing to escape the confines of our marriage. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. My worst fears materialized into a cold, hard reality, and the initial shock gave way to a wave of anger and betrayal. Lindsay had been having an affair, and every instinct I had ignored now seemed justified. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, each wave crashing over me, hurt, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I sat on the edge of our bed, the phone trembling in my hands. I replayed the past few months in my mind, desperately trying to make sense of it all. The signs I had dismissed suddenly felt glaringly obvious. The late nights, the phone calls, the distance. It was all part of a web of deceit I had unknowingly walked into. The woman I had devoted my life to, the woman I thought I knew so well, had hidden a part of herself from me. As the reality of the situation sank in, a mixture of anger and heartbreak flooded my chest. Lindsay had chosen to confide in another man, to share her secrets and dreams with someone who wasn't me. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't she come to me? Had I been so blind? At that moment, I felt a sense of powerlessness wash over me. But beneath it was a flicker of determination. If she could betray me so easily, then I needed to take control of the narrative. I needed to confront this head-on, to make sense of the chaos that had invaded my life. The trust we had built over the years had crumbled, and I had to decide what I would do next. I knew that I was facing a pivotal moment in my life, one that would forever alter the course of our relationship. The question now was how to respond to this betrayal and what path I would choose. As I sat there in the dim light of our room, the weight of my discovery hung heavily in the air, a harbinger of the storm that was about to unfold. I sat on the edge of the couch, my heart pounding in my chest as I awaited Lindsay's return. The early evening light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken words and hidden truths. I replayed the conversation in my head, knowing that the moment she walked through the door, everything would change. When she finally entered, I caught a glimpse of the woman I once knew, the one who filled our home with laughter and warmth. But beneath that familiar exterior lay a stranger, someone who had hidden a monumental betrayal from me. I could feel the anger bubbling just below the surface, a fire ignited by the sense of injustice that coursed through my veins. "Lindsay," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "We need to talk." She paused, sensing the gravity in my tone. The casual smile that usually greeted me faded, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "What's wrong, Adam?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts like armor for the battle ahead. "I know about the affair. I found your messages with Dr. Williams." The words hung in the air between us, each syllable like a hammer striking metal. For a moment, silence enveloped the room. Lindsay's face drained of color, and her eyes widened in shock. You found out?" Her voice trembled slightly, and I could see the conflict playing out on her face. "Cut the act, Lindsay," I said, frustration lacing my voice. "I deserve an explanation. How could you do this to us?" She took a step back, her hands instinctively moving to her sides as if seeking comfort in their familiarity. "Adam, I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she stammered. "It just happened. I was lonely." "Lonely?" I echoed, disbelief flooding my senses. "After 12 years together, how could you feel lonely? We were building a life. A future. I thought we were in this together." Lindsay's expression shifted. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that made me momentarily hesitate. "I know. I thought so too," she said, her voice softer now. "But things changed. I felt like I was fading into the background. You were so consumed with work, and I was left alone with my thoughts. It was like I was shouting into a void, and no one was listening." I clenched my fists, the pain of her words cutting deeper than I anticipated. "So you chose to go to someone else? To betray me? I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought I was just making a friend. I never wanted to hurt you, Adam." I felt so neglected, she pleaded, her voice trembling now. "Dr. Williams was there when I needed someone to talk to, and one thing led to another. I got lost in it. Lost in it." The words echoed in my mind like a bitter refrain. "But you could have talked to me, Lindsay. You could have told me how you were feeling. Instead, you chose to lie and deceive me. You chose him over our life together." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, trying to deny the truth of her actions. "I know I should have. But I was scared. I didn't want to burden you with my feelings. I thought you were happy." "Happy?" I said, bitterness rising in my throat. "How could I be happy when the woman I love is secretly betraying me? You took everything we built and threw it away." Lindsay stepped closer, desperation evident in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Adam. I thought I could fix things on my own, but I was wrong. I never wanted to hurt you. Can we find a way back from this?" As she spoke, I felt a storm of mixed emotions brewing inside me. I was hurt, furious, and heartbroken all at once. The love I once felt for her clashed violently with the betrayal that now clouded my heart. I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but I also felt a flicker of the affection I had for her, the memories of happier times clawing their way to the surface. In the days that followed, I found myself engulfed in a torrent of emotions. Each morning, I would wake up hoping the previous day's confrontation had been just a nightmare, that I would find Lindsay lying beside me, her head nestled on my chest, the sunlight streaming in through the window, illuminating the life we once shared. But reality would crash over me like a tidal wave, dragging me back to the truth that had shattered my world. Pain was a constant companion now, gnawing at my insides like a relentless predator. I was angry at Lindsay for her betrayal, angry at myself for being oblivious to the cracks forming in our relationship. It felt as though I had been blindsided by a storm I never saw coming. The laughter and love that once filled our home had been replaced by silence, a heavy fog that made it difficult to breathe. As I navigated this emotional maze, I found myself reflecting on the years we had spent together. The love that had once felt unshakable now felt like an illusion. How could I have misread the signs? How could I have trusted her so completely when she had chosen to confide in another man? I thought of all those nights spent talking about our dreams, and I felt a deep sense of betrayal coursing through me. I wanted to confront her again, to lay out all the questions that plagued my mind, but the thought of seeing her face filled me with dread. Would I see the woman I loved or a stranger? I had studied her for years, learned the nuances of her laughter, and the tilt of her head when she was lost in thought, but now I felt like an intruder in my own life, unable to reconcile the past with the present. The anger inside me burned fiercely, but alongside it lay an overwhelming sense of sadness. I had lost not just my wife but the future I had envisioned. I was torn between wanting to save our marriage and the deep-seated need to protect myself from further pain. How could I trust her again after she had shattered my heart? Could our love ever be rebuilt, or was it irreparably broken? In those moments of solitude, I wrestled with my thoughts. Should I give her another chance? After all, we had shared so much. We had built a life together, one filled with shared dreams and hopes. But then the reality of her actions would crash over me again, reminding me of the deep wound she had inflicted. I found myself imagining what life would be like without her, wondering if I could find happiness again. But the thought of ending our marriage filled me with a profound sense of loss. I had invested so much in her, in us, and the idea of walking away felt unbearable. Days turned into sleepless nights, each filled with questions I couldn't answer. Should I forgive her? Should I fight to salvage what was left of our relationship? Or should I let go of the past and forge a new path, even if it meant saying goodbye to the life I had known? The internal battle raged on, a constant push and pull between love and betrayal, hope and despair. I knew I had to make a decision, but as I stood at the crossroads of my life, uncertainty loomed large, casting a shadow over every thought. In that silence, amidst the echoes of our shared memories, I realized that whatever choice I made would define not only my future but also the man I would become. As the reality of Lindsay's betrayal settled in, a different kind of anger began to stir within me, one that was more calculated, more chilling. I had spent days wrestling with the pain of her infidelity, but now that pain had transformed into a burning desire for retribution. I found myself imagining how to make her pay for what she had done, how to turn the tables on the woman who had shattered my world. The thought of simply walking away felt inadequate. I was tired of being the victim, of feeling powerless in the face of her deceit. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. If Lindsay could betray me so easily, then perhaps it was time for her to experience a taste of her own medicine. I envisioned a strategy that would dismantle her carefully curated image, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. I started by mapping out our social circle, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances we had accumulated over the years. Each person represented a thread in the fabric of our lives together, and I realized that I could use those threads to weave a narrative that would serve my purpose. The key was to spread the seeds of doubt, to create an undercurrent of suspicion that would blossom into full-blown gossip. I wanted Lindsay to feel the weight of her actions, to understand that betrayal had consequences beyond the confines of our marriage. At first, I felt a pang of guilt. After all, we shared a life filled with love, laughter, and countless memories. But that guilt was quickly eclipsed by a surge of vindictiveness. Lindsay had chosen her path, and now it was my turn to choose mine. I would become the architect of her downfall, the mastermind behind the whispers that would echo through our community. I began to devise a plan. My approach needed to be subtle yet effective. I would have to be careful, weaving my way into conversations and planting ideas without raising suspicion. The goal was to make my allegations sound like mere observations or concerns, ensuring that no one would suspect my true intentions. I imagined myself sitting in casual gatherings, perhaps over coffee or a drink, casually steering the conversation toward relationships, fidelity, and trust. "Have you ever noticed how people can change?" I would ask, feigning innocence. "It's strange, isn't it? I mean, I've been feeling a little uneasy about some things lately." I could picture the curious glances, the raised eyebrows, as my words began to take root. I also made a mental note to approach some of Lindsay's close friends, those who had always been sympathetic to her. I would frame my concerns as a husband's worry, seeking their advice, and in the process, letting slip the inappropriate behavior I suspected she had exhibited. The goal was to sow doubt among her supporters, to make them question her loyalty and character. The more I plotted, the more invigorated I felt. The thought of watching Lindsay's world unravel, of seeing her squirm under the weight of her actions, filled me with a dark sense of satisfaction. I envisioned her shocked expression, the disbelief that would flash across her face as she realized that her reputation was crumbling around her. With each passing day, the plan took shape, fueled by the hurt and anger that had become my constant companions. I crafted a list of potential scenarios, rehearsing how I would introduce these ideas into conversations. My mind raced with possibilities, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I embraced this new role as the orchestrator of her public shame. The moment arrived when I finally felt ready to set my plan into motion. I had spent the last week meticulously crafting my approach, and now it was time to execute it. The first gathering of friends came up, an evening barbecue at Mike and Sarah's place. It was the perfect setting, casual and relaxed, with plenty of opportunities to steer the conversation in the right direction. As we arrived at their home, the familiar warmth of laughter and chatter enveloped me. The scent of grilled meats filled the air, and I momentarily allowed myself to enjoy the atmosphere. I exchanged pleasantries, greeting friends and neighbors, but in the back of my mind, I was preparing for my act. I made my way to the patio, where a group of friends had gathered. Mike was flipping burgers while Sarah poured drinks. I settled into a chair, casually listening to the light-hearted banter. As the conversation flowed, I interjected, feigning casual interest. "Isn't it funny how some people change?" I began, glancing around the group. "Like, you think you know someone, and then suddenly they start acting differently." The conversation shifted slightly, intrigued by my comment. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "Oh, you know," I said, adopting an air of nonchalance. "I've just been feeling a little off about things lately, especially with Lindsay. It seems like she's been a bit more distant, like something's bothering her. I can't help but wonder if she's being completely honest with me." A collective hush fell over the group. I could see the gears turning in their minds, the initial curiosity igniting a spark of concern. I continued, planting the seeds of doubt. "I've caught her on her phone a lot lately, and it feels like she's hiding something. I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it just makes me wonder, you know?" I watched as the expressions on their faces shifted. Mike raised an eyebrow, exchanging glances with Sarah. "Wow, that's kind of concerning, man. Have you talked to her about it?" "Not yet," I replied, shrugging, but inside I felt a rush of satisfaction. "But it's just hard not to think about it. I mean, you know how things can get in relationships. It's like one minute you're happy, and the next, it's all different." I let my words linger, allowing the implication to settle in. The conversation moved on, but I noticed how my comments had created an undercurrent of suspicion. The tension in the air was palpable, a delicate web of doubt woven among us. Over the next few days, I continued to drop hints, carefully crafting conversations to ensure the whispers spread. I would mention Lindsay's late nights and her newfound friendship with Dr. Williams during casual get-togethers, each time framing my words as concern rather than accusation. The friends who once saw her as an embodiment of grace and kindness were now starting to question her actions, and I reveled in the unfolding drama. As the rumors began to circulate, I could feel a sense of power swelling within me. Each concerned whisper echoed the pain I had endured. Each doubtful glance reflected the betrayal I had suffered. I was reclaiming my narrative, turning the tables on the woman who had turned my life upside down. I watched as Lindsay became increasingly isolated, the fabric of her reputation slowly unraveling. The phone calls from friends turned into cautious inquiries, each one a reminder of the destruction I was unleashing. She was losing the trust and respect of those she had once held dear, and I found myself reveling in the chaos I had set into motion. The thrill of the hunt had taken hold of me, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As I watched her world begin to crumble, I felt a perverse sense of satisfaction. I knew there was no going back now. I had crossed a line, but it felt like the only way to reclaim the power she had stolen from me. The whispers had begun, and I was ready to watch them spiral into a storm. It was astonishing how quickly rumors spread, like wildfire consuming everything in its path. I had anticipated a slow burn, a gradual erosion of Lindsay's reputation. But I never could have imagined how swiftly the whispers would take hold. Within days, our friends and neighbors began to withdraw from her, their smiles turning to furtive glances as they exchanged knowing looks whenever her name was mentioned. The first signs came during a dinner party at Jessica and Tom's house. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the palpable tension in the air. Conversations that once flowed easily became stilted, punctuated by awkward pauses. I watched as Jessica attempted to make small talk with Lindsay, but her laughter was strained, and the warmth in her eyes had been replaced with skepticism. "Have you talked to Adam lately?" Jessica asked casually, but I noticed the way her eyes darted to me, seeking my reaction. I played it cool, casually leaning back in my chair, feigning disinterest while my heart raced with anticipation. Lindsay's response was subdued, her voice lacking its usual vibrancy. "Not really. Just the usual. Busy with work and everything." The hint of defensiveness in her tone didn't go unnoticed, and I could sense the shift in the room. The subtle undercurrents of distrust rippled through our circle, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. As the evening progressed, I sat back and observed how our friends interacted with Lindsay, each moment a testament to the impact of the rumors I had unleashed. Their laughter felt forced, their conversations laced with an unspoken tension. It was as if they were walking on eggshells, unsure of how to address her or whether they should even acknowledge her at all. I reveled in the realization that I had crafted this reality, orchestrating the social dynamic with precision. In the days that followed, I began to notice a pattern. Invitations that once flowed freely began to dwindle. Lindsay, who had always been at the center of our social gatherings, now found herself excluded from dinner parties and outings. Conversations among friends shifted from light-hearted banter to whispers about her behavior. I could see it in their eyes, doubt had seeped in. And the support she once relied upon was crumbling. Every time I heard a rumor echoed back to me, a flicker of satisfaction ignited within me. It felt like a vindication for the hurt I had endured. I caught snippets of conversations at the grocery store, whispers in the park while I walked the dog, and even casual mentions at work. "Did you hear about Lindsay? I heard she's been acting strange." Each comment fueled the fire of my revenge, stoking the embers of my hurt. As I navigated our neighborhood, I noticed how her once friendly interactions had turned cold. Neighbors who used to greet her with warm smiles now avoided her gaze. I watched as she tried to engage in small talk with Martha from next door, only to be met with polite nods and a quick exit. The realization that her world was shrinking, that her support system was dissipating, filled me with a twisted sense of fulfillment. Lindsay's phone calls went unanswered, her texts were met with silence, and the loneliness that settled over her was palpable. I could feel the weight of it even from a distance, a suffocating shroud that wrapped around her. I knew she was struggling, and while a part of me grappled with the morality of my actions, the other part relished in the fruits of my revenge. On one particularly difficult evening, I found myself at a bar with some friends, relishing the atmosphere of camaraderie. As the laughter and chatter surrounded me, I caught sight of Lindsay through the window. She was walking alone, her shoulders slumped. The vibrancy that once characterized her now reduced to a dull shadow. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of empathy, but it quickly dissipated, replaced by the satisfaction of having orchestrated her downfall. It was at that moment I realized how deep my plan had penetrated our lives. The very people who had once celebrated her were now hesitant to even engage her in conversation. I felt like a puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows as I watched the fallout of my actions unfold. The satisfaction of watching her life unravel, piece by piece, became a drug, a high I couldn't resist. As weeks passed, the distance between us grew more pronounced. Friends began to approach me, asking about Lindsay and expressing their concerns. "Is everything okay with her?" they would inquire, their brows furrowed in confusion. I seized these opportunities, planting further seeds of doubt, and carefully crafting my words to reinforce the narrative I had created. "I'm worried too. It's not like her to act this way." Each conversation solidified the rift between Lindsay and the people she once held dear. I watched as she fought to maintain her dignity, desperately reaching out to friends who now hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The isolation began to eat away at her, and the emotional toll was evident. I found a dark pleasure in this transformation. The woman who had once been the heartbeat of our social life was now a pariah, cast out and abandoned. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time in months, I felt in control. The pain she had inflicted on me had morphed into something unrecognizable, a powerful resolve to see my plan through to its bitter end. As I continued to watch Lindsay's life crumble, I knew there was no turning back. The thrill of revenge had taken root, and I was willing to see it through, no matter the cost. The air in our house had grown thick with tension, an unspoken animosity hanging between us like a storm cloud ready to burst. I had been meticulously orchestrating Lindsay's social downfall for weeks, but I never expected the consequences to reverberate back into the walls of our home. Each day, as I witnessed her isolation deepen, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and turmoil churning inside me, battling for supremacy. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across our living room, I heard the front door slam shut. I barely registered the sound before I was jolted from my thoughts by the sound of Lindsay's footsteps. My heart raced, and I instinctively braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I could hear her muffled sobs as she approached, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Adam," she cried out, her voice trembling with desperation. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks, her face a mask of anguish. "Please, we need to talk." The sight of her like this, so raw and vulnerable, should have invoked a sense of empathy within me. But instead, a rush of exhilaration coursed through my veins. This was the culmination of my plans, the moment I had been waiting for. I felt powerful, like a king surveying his conquered kingdom. "What's there to talk about, Lindsay?" I replied, adopting a tone of indifference that I hoped would infuriate her further. "You've made your choices." Her eyes widened, and the anguish morphed into a plea. "No, you don't understand. I'm begging you, stop this. I can't take it anymore. I've lost everyone. I'm being humiliated in front of our friends. And it's killing me." She stepped closer, her voice rising as the weight of her emotions bore down on her. "I don't know what I did to deserve this. I'm so sorry for what happened. I thought I could find something I was missing, but I never wanted it to come to this. I need you to help me. Please." Each word was like a dagger, cutting deeper into my conscience. She was breaking down in front of me, and I reveled in her suffering, but with every tear that fell, I felt a nagging voice in the back of my mind questioning my actions. Was this truly what I wanted? To see the woman I once loved brought to her knees? For a moment, I let her words hang in the air, wrestling with my emotions. The satisfaction I had felt in watching her crumble began to clash with the reality of her pain. I knew her betrayal had hurt me deeply, but did it warrant this level of cruelty? Was I becoming the very thing I despised, the architect of someone's misery? As I stood there, wrestling with my conflicting emotions, I could see the desperation etched on her face. "I never meant to hurt you, Adam. I made a mistake. I just needed more from you, attention, affection. I thought you didn't care anymore." Her words were laced with honesty, a painful reminder of the cracks that had begun to form in our marriage long before the affair. I felt a flicker of guilt igniting within me. Was I partially to blame for her actions? Had I neglected her so completely that she felt driven to seek comfort elsewhere? Yet, I couldn't shake the thrill of control I had gained. Watching her squirm was intoxicating, and the power I felt was exhilarating. I had never been the one in charge of our relationship. I had always followed her lead, and always played the role of the supportive husband. Now, with every social snub and whispered rumor, I was reclaiming my agency. "Lindsay," I said, my voice steady but laced with an edge. "What do you expect me to do? Pretend none of this happened? You made your choices, and now you had to deal with the consequences. Maybe if you had thought about that before you decided to betray me." She flinched at my words as if I had struck her. I could see her retreating into herself, the anger and despair battling for dominance within her. "I know I messed up, but please, I'm asking you to stop. I can't live like this. It's unbearable." As her voice cracked, the sight of her anguish pierced my heart, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the walls I had built around my emotions start to crumble. I was enjoying this too much. Each moment of her suffering had been a balm to my wounds. But now I was left grappling with the bitter taste of revenge and the realization of the person I was becoming. Suddenly, I felt overwhelmed. My inner turmoil surged, and the satisfaction I had derived from her suffering began to wane. This wasn't who I was. I didn't want to be the villain in our story. Yet, the thought of stopping felt like conceding defeat. "Why should I, Lindsay? Why should I take pity on you now when you didn't spare a thought for me?" I shot back, though my voice was softer, the edge of cruelty dulling. "Because I'm still your wife, Adam," she said, her eyes glistening with desperation. "Despite everything that's happened, I'm still the person you loved once. I can change, we can change, but you had to give me a chance." Her words hung in the air, a lifeline I could either grasp or push away. The fight inside me raged on as I wrestled with the implications of her plea. Could I forgive her? Was it possible to turn back time and reclaim what we had lost? But as I looked into her eyes, filled with sorrow and regret, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The thought of her suffering was no longer exhilarating, it was a burden I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. "I need time to think," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. As I walked away, I felt torn between the exhilaration of my revenge and the remnants of the love I still had for her. I knew this was only the beginning of a conflict far deeper than either of us could have imagined. The days that followed my confrontation with Lindsay were a blur of emotions and inner conflict. As I sat alone in our once vibrant living room, now a hollow shell of what it used to be, I found myself lost in thought, grappling with the magnitude of the destruction I had wrought. The taste of vengeance, once so sweet, had turned bitter on my tongue. The echoes of Lindsay's sobs lingered in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was wading deeper into a quagmire of my own making. Each night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of my actions pressed down on me like a heavy shroud. I thought of the woman I had married, the laughter we once shared, the dreams we had built together. All of it now seemed so far away, eclipsed by the shadow of betrayal. I could still see the glimmer in her eyes from when we first met, the spark that ignited a love so deep it felt unbreakable. But now, that spark had been extinguished, and what remained was a smoldering ruin. What had I accomplished with my vendetta? I had stripped Lindsay of her friends, her dignity, her place in our community. Yet in doing so, I had also set fire to my own life. I could feel the isolation creeping in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The friends who once reached out to me with support now looked at me with a mixture of pity and apprehension. They weren't sure what to make of the man I had become, the man who reveled in the downfall of his wife. As I poured myself a glass of whiskey one evening, the amber liquid glistening in the low light, I pondered the path I had chosen. I had initiated a whirlwind of destruction, believing that I could take back the power that Lindsay had wrested from me. But now, I was left standing amidst the wreckage, a hollow version of the man I used to be. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through me, but it did nothing to alleviate the growing emptiness inside. Every action has consequences, and I was beginning to understand the weight of mine. The whispers of discontent I had spread were not merely about Lindsay, they were a reflection of my deep-seated pain. The more I watched her life unravel, the more I realized that I was not just a bystander in this tragedy, I was the architect. I had thought I could wield my anger like a weapon, but all it had done was leave scars on both of us. My friends had distanced themselves from Lindsay, but they were also backing away from me. "What happened to you, Adam?" I could hear them murmur, their voices tinged with concern. "He used to be a good guy." The thought gnawed at me. I had once prided myself on being kind, supportive, and understanding. Yet here I was, wallowing in the very darkness I had aimed to cast upon her. I realized that my revenge had not only decimated her but had also eroded my sense of self. Sitting on the couch, I began to replay the last few months in my mind. How easily I had slipped into the role of the villain. I had let my hurt morph into a weapon, blinding me to the reality of our situation. The pain I had endured was real, but I had allowed it to dictate my actions, pushing me further down a path of destruction. Now, as I surveyed the damage, I found myself questioning what it would take to heal, not just for Lindsay, but for me as well. The idea of forgiveness began to take root in my mind, though it felt foreign and daunting. Could I truly forgive her for what she had done? And could I also forgive myself for the depths to which I had sunk? The thought of letting go of the anger that had consumed me was terrifying, yet I knew it was the only way to find peace. If I continued down this path of vengeance, I would lose not only Lindsay but also myself completely. As I sipped my drink, the warmth of the whiskey didn't just soothe me, it became a catalyst for reflection. I realized that healing wouldn't come from destroying Lindsay's life, it would come from rebuilding my own. I had the power to choose a different path, to reclaim my identity and reshape my future. I could stop the cycle of pain, not just for her, but for myself as well. The thought of starting over seemed overwhelming. How could I approach Lindsay after everything that had happened? The distance between us felt insurmountable. Yet I knew that reaching out was the first step toward healing. Maybe I could extend an olive branch, acknowledge the hurt we had both caused, and see if there was a way forward. I closed my eyes, envisioning a scenario where we could sit together, no accusations, no anger, just a conversation. A conversation where I could express my hurt without losing sight of her humanity. I wanted to understand her feelings, to listen to her side of the story. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to salvage what was left of our marriage. The thought of forgiveness began to feel like a flicker of light in the dark, a glimmer of hope that perhaps we could both emerge from this ordeal stronger and more resilient. The journey would be long and fraught with challenges, but it was one worth taking. I wanted to find the strength within myself to let go of the past and embrace the possibility of a future, whether that future included Lindsay or not. As I sat there, contemplating my next steps, I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The emotions were raw, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. But the question remained, would I allow the darkness to define me, or would I rise from the ashes, ready to reclaim my life? At that moment, I chose the latter. I would seek forgiveness, not just for Lindsay, but for myself. It was time to break free from the chains of anger and resentment and step into a new chapter, one that held the potential for healing and growth. As I set the glass down and took a deep breath, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a journey toward redemption.